A lot of the way I look at the world is very much informed by the experience of my parents, particularly my mom's journey, coming to the United States, getting education, raising children, being married, traveling across the country, and all the ways in which race, culture, gender kind of has impacted her in her life. And I think through growing up and watching some of the challenges that my mom navigated with a lot of grace, but that were also really hard, is one of the reasons I'm in the work that I do. I'm always really trying to figure out what are the ways in which we support people in having agency and autonomy over their livelihoods, over their well-being. And so, my work has been informed through, years. I mean, I'm late 30s-ish now, but a long time participating in social movements.
Talk a little bit more about what a solutions-oriented approach is.
Yeah, I think for me, the way I think of a solutions-oriented approach, it's one in which it requires us to be in solidarity with finding what the problem is, figuring out the solution to the problem as much as naming what the problem is, right? And so some people will kind of say this as like, don't write a check that you can't cash, right? Don't bring up a problem that you haven't actually spent the time figuring out, well, what is a mechanism, a way to address it, a way to fix it? And not to say that there isn't just value in being able to understand what the problem is, but that the invitation for us is to all come together and then figure out, well, what are the steps to actually addressing this problem at the root, and what are the real challenges for some of the implementation strategies? Like, well, what would we do when we actually win, and who would lead, and how would we lead, and how would it actually be different? Because the system continues to operate like it's like a pendulum. It swings. Our systems around white supremacy, like patriarchy, those are our habits. Those are our patterns as a society. And so to intentionally shift them, we need individuals who can be in that system, but then push back against that pendulum in the other direction. But you put anybody into that sea, if they're not actually clear about the system that they're operating within, they'll start to replicate the same things over and over again. And so I think that's why being able to hold ourselves with grace and nuance and understanding around like all that we're up against, and still committing ourselves to the rigor of what does it mean for us to be able to govern and care for ourselves, is also essential. Once again, for me, capitalism is a system. It's a system designed to kind of prop up profit maximization over the well-being of people and the planet. Capital is a tool. It's a resource. And capital can be used as a tool that can create harm, that can be really extractive and exploitative, or it can create healing. It can be really regenerative. And the ways that we exchange capital is the things that either create harm or create healing. And so I just think it's kind of important for us to figure out how we not be afraid of engaging in conversations around money. We can't go around it. We have to actually go through it. And it's going through these experiments. It's going through being in deep relationship that's rooted in trust and accountability with people, that we start to not only get a sense of who we truly are as human beings and how we show up in the best and the hardest of times, but then what the projects are that sustain our community, what's actually necessary to support us in these moments. There's a number of different ways people are starting to come together to create community-owned infrastructure to help with the redistribution of wealth back in to their communities. And that they're figuring out then, as we have those assets together, coming back to this piece on governance, how do we collectively govern those assets together? How are we coming together to wrestle with the decisions, not of who eats caviar and who eats potatoes, but how do we make sure that we're all well fed, right? And those are really hard conversations to have, but they're necessary. And once again, it's through the doing and wrestling with the challenges and nuances of those conversations that we actually understand how we create transformation. And that at the end of the day, for me, my work is not just to ensure that more people own more things together, which I think at a baseline that's like beautiful and would be great, but understanding that it's the economic power that we're collectively building as a community that then allows us to then leverage that and engage in the political power, right? Think about mutual aid and some of the other collective well-being strategies, not just as something to do in this rapid response moment, but these are actually the fabric, the thread of what we need in the long term, right? People coming together to aggregate capital to move it to people to pay their rent, people coming together and helping to distribute groceries and food. All those things are actually what we need in a solidarity economy going forward. Once we kind of, the government quote unquote reopens, my hope is that those things don't stop. But if anything, those ways of connectivity, those strategies for supporting local neighbors become more formalized, more rigorous. And I think that is what's also exciting. And so for us to not think about like, oh, well, that was just what we did when we were sheltering in place. It's like, oh, that's actually an insight to the type of society that I want. A lot of the way I look at the world is very much informed by the experience of my parents, particularly my mom's journey, coming to the United States, getting education, raising children, being married, traveling across the country, and all the ways in which race, culture, gender kind of has impacted her in her life. And I think through growing up and watching some of the challenges that my mom navigated with a lot of grace, but they were also really hard, is one of the reasons I'm in the work that I do. I'm always really trying to figure out what are the ways in which we support people in having agency and autonomy over their livelihoods, over their well-being. And so, my work has been informed through, years. I mean, I'm late 30s-ish now, but a long time participating in social movements. A friend shared with me, a dear friend, Jennifer Neer, out of New Hampshire, and she talked about how her and her partner went door to door with their neighbors, with their gloves and masks on, left a note with their number, and was like, if you let us know if you need anything, if you are an elderly person who lives alone, we'll be happy to include groceries in our grocery run. So those are ways in which we get to start to experiment. What do we have the emotional and mental capacity for, and how are we able to show up for others? And it doesn't always have to be this big, grand gesture, right? We get to start small, and not that small in terms of scale or less meaningful, but small in terms of the unit of relationship that starts to connect us with those that are closest around us. So I think that may be one way for us to kind of think about how we move through this moment.